All right, welcome to episode 3 of Live Life on the Edge, where we talk with interesting people doing interesting things in the manufacturing and supply chain space. Today I have Andrew Johnson with Shelfware. Andrew and I have known each other for a few years now. He's doing some really innovative things inside the supply chain. Came from the industry, and just want to thank you for joining me with this discussion, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really looking forward to talking with you, getting out and talking with some of the folks in your industry. Should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me a little background, right? Like kind of, what's your history inside the industry? Maybe talk about how the idea of Shelfware came about, just the story. Let's start there.
Sure, yeah. The story really starts in 2012. And that was when I was working for my family business, which is an industrial distributor. And in 2012, well, let me back up a little bit further. I am only boy, 3 sisters. And my sisters, throughout the years, started marrying guys who were fairly entrepreneurial, and shockingly, they all started joining the company. So this little family business soon had 4 brothers. So me and my 3 brother-in-laws working inside this company in different roles inside the company. And in 2012, we kind of the boys undertook this huge project of installing a new ERP system. And that was our first aha moment that we had as business owners, as entrepreneurs, because it forced us as young guys just getting our feet wet, forced us to work on the business and not really in the business. And it also gave us a huge appreciation for the data that drove even our little tiny business. So at the time, we were about 3 million in revenue, roughly 20 employees, and bought a Profit 21 ERP system from Epicor. And I mean, you hear all these nightmare stories about ERP implementations, but we got really lucky. We had a former employee who had moved on into the programming world and become a data architect for a local bank. And he's a bachelor, which was also handy because he had lots of spare time. So he came back and actually advised us to not farm out our data processing for the ERP conversion, but to do it ourselves, which was, did not have the skill set to do that. So he came in a couple nights a week, and we worked about 6 p.m. till 10 or midnight on our data sets, and he'd help us clean them up using SQL. So we'd write SQL code, and then that code, those strings of code would clean up like entire databases and then convert them into our new ERP mapping for our new ERP implementation. And so when Go Live came around, after all that really hard upfront data work, we pushed a button and the whole thing went live, and we had like very few hiccups. We brought all of our history, company history, sales data from 1996 over.
Wow.
And yeah, wild success in the ERP conversion. Our appreciation for data really cemented, and we learned how to start writing, really simplistic computer code. When I say we, the 3 of us, me and 2 of my brother-in-laws, learned that our other brother-in-law, Adam, who actually, he learned how to code. We learned that he could code, and we could force him to code other cool things for us. And so we started coming up with ideas of business automation, like internal innovations, where we take like process automation, and he'd write little pieces of code for us inside the company. And so from 2012 to 2015, that's pretty much what we were doing. We were making, going to different departments in our business, like shipping and receiving, QC and inspection, customer service and sales. And we're looking at each department, breaking down the processes that they do every day, and then building them back up in some sort of more automated, paperless, digital fashion, and making the whole company more efficient, like wildly more efficient. So for instance, one of the innovations we made internally was we took a counting scale, we put a Raspberry Pi inside of this counting scale that talked to our database, and then we paid some college kid at a JUCO, junior college in town, to write a little mobile app, Android mobile app for us. So the shipping guys could pull a product off the shelf, scan a little QR code on the product, and it would load the piece weight that was stored from a previous count of that product, and pull that from the database, load it in the counting scale, and so they didn't have to do sample counts anymore. And that little internal invention, innovation, saved us hours in shipping every week. So it helped us grow and scale our business without hiring new shippers, because they could count, pick and pack, pull parts a lot faster. So that was 2015. That invention honestly could have been a business in and of itself, but we did
I
a
was going to
terrible
say,
job. Yeah.
yeah, that's the business outcome that everyone searches for, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
like huge chunks of saving, like, hundreds of hours. If you had, a dozen shippers or so, you could save maybe 100 hours a week in a shipping department of small parts. And so, and the scale industry didn't have anything available like this. They didn't have a networkable scale that could talk to an API and, interface with a mobile app. None of that existed. We invented all of that. Then we did a terrible job wrapping up the intellectual property. So unfortunately, today you can go out and buy this connected scale system from, I think a variety of companies, but Pennsylvania Scale is the one that used our original app that we didn't lock up.
Interesting.
And yeah. So I don't have any stake in that one, unfortunately, but it's a great invention if you want to get it. It's called Pivot Wireless by Pennsylvania Scale. And they used to have like originally some videos in our warehouse of us like demoing the app.
Nice.
Our videos. Like,
nice. So the technology, the business model, and the marketing.
Yeah, all wrapped up. And that was 15. So then we kind of set our sights on an external innovation. I think that's a good entrepreneurial kind of process. Is if you're going to write software and hardware, develop it internally. If you have a business, it's great to develop your skill sets, all your different skill sets internally. A lot lower risk, a lot cheaper, a lot easier, and then you can measure the ROI a lot better too.
Yeah.
So we did a couple internal innovations, and then in 16 we launched ShelfAware, and it was really on the outskirt, like on the outside, it was just our attempt to make a better vendor managed inventory system. So we were running VMIs, which is usually like a person in a truck and an industrial distributor will drive on location to a consumer's facility, count parts, come back, put together a physical order, go back, deliver the parts, stock the shelves. We were doing that in our family business and we hated it because it's crazy inefficient. So that was originally why we invented Shelfware, was a way to remotely monitor customers' consumption of inventory that we were contracted to replenish.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was developed in 16. We beta launched it in 16. And then I guess in 17 had kind of another aha moment of like, whoa, this is a lot more than just a remote VMI, the consumption data. Once we pull up enough of it, we can do a lot of other cool things with it, like physically reposition the inventory so our consumers can pick and pull faster, co-locate items that get pulled together. We can do inventory audits on like huge physical inventories in minutes or hours instead of days or weeks on small parts. And yeah.
So you're kind of becoming like the Amazon Go for like the factory floor in essence.
Yeah, that's funny you bring that up because when we did a terrible job on the scale invention with the intellectual property. So we, life of hard knocks, we learned a valuable lesson there. And so when we came up with the Shelfware concept, we did some intellectual property searches to see if anybody had anything out there that was using strictly like passive RFID to, remotely monitor inventory. Didn't find anything, so we filed for a couple different patents. And before we launched it publicly, we had this one little beta going, but we hadn't like marketed or advertised or anything. And then right as we had gotten our patents filed and we had one patent granted on our scanning station set up, the news broke on Amazon Go. And we're like, whoa, we initially looked, so I ended up spending a lot of time researching their patents and learned that Amazon Go concept, although very similar to what we were doing, is a much more complex system that uses a lot of like cameras and visual analytics, trying to like visually tell if things are missing off store shelves. Ours is strictly smart labels, which are just passive RFID tags embedded inside product packaging. And Amazon uses some RFID, I think. It's kind of hard to tell because they have so many patents on the whole system to do their smart convenience store. Yeah, but it is similar in concept. Like you on a factory floor, we'll typically have like 4 or 5 different rows and pallet racks, and they're filled with hundreds or thousands of inventory SKUs that are packaged in smaller quantities, like a convenience store. And factory personnel walk in, grab a bag of bolts, a box of O-rings, and maybe a bag of gaskets, and they walk out, and our hardware tracks the product leaving that store. Yeah, and then just sends a signal, through the cloud back to the suppliers to replenish the product. And then over time, you can do great forecasting and really lean out your inventory to try and get it to turn up to 12 times a year, trying to do once a month.
So just to unpack that a bit, so that could be, so vendor managed inventory. So this stuff fascinates me because I think there's a ton of waste in the distribution, if it's in the seal side of the world or the fluid powered side of the world or the bearing side of the world, how much capital companies are holding on their shelves all the time. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be vendor managed inventory. This could just be your own managed inventory, especially a lot of distributors are becoming value added manufacturers as well, systems integrators. So that's super interesting. So just walk me through a little bit like what an install process, because you hear this and coming from the fluid power world, people don't want to get scared by the technology. I've seen some of your demos, right? Full disclosure at trade shows, it's awesome. So kind of walk through the listener's audience on like how this gets deployed, what that friction level looks like, how easy it is to consume.
Right. So at a real basic level, and we got our start, in the fluid power industry because our family business was a seal and gasket distributor. So like we had tons of fluid power customers. So that's kind of naturally where we started. But today we're really, from a very simplistic big picture view, Shelfware can operate very well in any B2B supply chain. And the way any typical installation would work is a supplier would have to work with a consumer to automate their B2B supply chain node. So between supplier and consumer using Shelfware, the supplier would put an RFID label printer at their location where they're dispersing the inventory. And I mean, typically we start with distribution, but it could also be a manufacturer that's going direct to consumer. And so that the RFID printer, there's a lot of different models out there, but we kind of usually use one from Zebra called a ZT410. It's about $4,000. Our standard printer costs like $3,000. So it's about a $1,000 upgrade, get you an RFID capable label printer. And then the Shelfware software will help the supplier print and generate those smart labels with RFID tags embedded inside the labels. They ship the product to the consumer. And the consumer has a piece of RFID hardware that Shelfware installs at their facility. It's usually a small table, kind of scanning station looking thing. It's installed at a physical bottleneck inside the inventory. We can run multiple stations to 3 or 4 stations at the consumer's facility. And whatever it takes to track the actual physical movement of the product as it leaves these areas. So you can think of them as like doorways, gateways, checkpoints. When that inventory leaves that area, we drive that consumption data back to the supplier who replenishes. The initial installation, though, of the system, like day one, the supplier usually sends a small team of folks into the consumer's facility because they're going to have a bunch of on-hand inventory.
Sure.
Like for instance, our first beta at a company here in Kansas City called Eskridge Manufacturing, they allowed us to just test this system kind of out in their facility in the real world. Longtime customer of our family business. We went in there and we told them, hey, we got this crazy concept, but we're going to have to come in and repackage all of your inventory.
By the way, every great product starts with that.
Yeah, a handshake and like a promise.
We had this great idea.
Yeah, and a conversation usually goes like, so I have this great idea that might not work.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't work, we'll come back in and do it how we always have done it, but can we just try this? And they said, yeah, sure, as long as you fix it if it all gets screwed up. So we said we would. But that initial go live process, you got to go into the consumer's physical location and usually repackage all their inventory to put smart labels on the initial on-hand inventory. Once it's all smart labeled, then you're tracking that in this cloud-based system, Shelfware's cloud-based system. It's all online then, and then we can watch it get checked out and then send those replenishment orders. Nice. So printer at supplier's location, scanners at consumer's location, and if they have a lot of initial on-hand inventory, we'll have to have a small, maybe day-long go-live process where we do one last physical inventory audit, package the parts into smaller package quantities with these smart labels on them, and then they're up and running. So most installations take a day or two and might cost like a couple $1,000s in time and labor to get a team of 5 to 10 people in and out of there.
Wow.
Then you're off and running.
And the hardware, the readers cost roughly.
So I usually lease those.
Okay.
And the hardware lease, it fluctuates based on the type of setup the consumer wants. If they wanted like a fancy portal, it'd be more expensive. I'm talking like $500 a month on a consumer side lease.
Yeah.
And if they want like a real basic scanning checkpoint station, $250 a month.
Wow.
Um,
Super cost
yeah.
effective. Yeah.
And the reason we lease it, which might sound like, unnecessary, but what we run into is the consumers and the suppliers. I mean, neither people in this, especially in the fluid power world, like not to knock on the fluid power world, but sometimes we're going from like a clipboard to a digitally run supply chain. It's quite the leap.
Yeah.
And the supplier and the consumer most of the time will not have the IT infrastructure, the personnel
Sure.
in place, that want to manage RFID readers and other types of assets like that. And they don't want to,
Yeah,
be
absolutely.
responsible to keep those online. So we just set up this lease program where we're like, look, we'll deploy them for you in the field. We'll set them up. We won't charge you anything to put them in there. There's no initial cost. We'll just run you on a monthly lease, and we'll promise you uptime, 24/7 uptime. If they go out, we'll replace them, fix them.
Nice.
Sometimes they run on cellular, so you don't have to use their local area network.
Yeah.
And we'll maintain all that, and it's all wrapped up in a real pretty, just fixed lease.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking like in the fluid power world, just kind of like bring it to the realm we play in. If I'm an OEM, I build machines, I got a supply chain contract for my distributor, and I'm going to start knowing how much of my inventory is going from my inventory to my factory floor, to my machine, out to my dealer, and I want to run that back to my distributor because I want to carry less inventory. I want my distributor to lower their costs. My distributor wants to increase their turns. That's where the power of the digital supply chain can really come in.
Yes. So like to put the numbers into perspective, if you had let's say you're a hydraulic pump manufacturer and you had 1,000 seal SKUs, you could install the system on your seal supply chain to start with. I'd pick one product vertical. So let's just say O-rings and gaskets. You had 1,000 SKUs, you put them on the system. Our typical installations are going to take a month or two to communicate all the details of the program between supplier and consumer, and then about a 2 to 3 day, maybe a single day installation period that costs like $5 or $10 grand. So your initial outlay from a consumer's perspective is like $5 to $10 grand to get your digital supply chain up and running. Yeah. Through a distributor or even direct manufacturer, and then the return, the ROI is instant, pretty much. In a couple months, 3 months typically, but sometimes 6, we'll have your inventory whittled down as much as 60% reduced on inventory.
That's incredible.
We do that by monitoring, that daily consumption.
The turn. You want to know the turn.
And we want it to turn. And so we actually analyze it on a SKU by SKU basis instead of like a product category basis. And so then we typically, and we have some analytics package we can overlay over all the big data that we're harvesting off these small inventory consumptions.
Very cool.
Basically, we set each SKU individually, what needs to be on the shelf and what the package quantity should be to efficiently match your production. And we do that across 1,000 SKUs over the period of the initial 3 to 6 months, and we'll cut inventories in half or more. Wow. And we'll turn, like even through a really high mix, because fluid power, like a lot of people are like, and this is the biggest, the number one thing I hear from fluid power people, like pump manufacturers, cylinder manufacturers, valve manufacturers, all of them say, oh, our supply chain's way too complex to run a system like this. And it's like, wrong, that's the complete, that's why you need a system like this, because really high mix supply chains with a really long tail. So they'll have only a handful of SKUs, maybe a couple dozen SKUs that are high volume. Then they'll have the rest are just like crappy volume, 5 here, 10 here, because everybody tries to tell me that they're too customized. We're too high tech, highly engineered, customized products. We just don't build 20,000 of one hydraulic cylinder. We build 20,000 cylinders, about 1,000 different ways. But when you look at the supply chain as a whole, a digital supply chain really handles the complexities much, much, much better than a team of people can. And we can see huge ROI on the most complex supply chains, even on product that has really long tails where you're maybe consuming 5, 10, 20 pieces per month. I mean, that's a pretty slow moving item, almost like MRO type stuff. We shine, we do really well with that.
So a couple thoughts here. One is, what's the cost of the RFID? So I'm not familiar with the world, right? This piece, that cost, if I want to put this onto my component, and it probably varies based on size and stuff, but just an idea of that additional cost to that piece of.
Yeah, common question. I think, and this was probably the cost of the RFID tags coming down drastically in the last 10 or 15 years was probably the number one driver of why we could pull this off. And I'll tell you this, if you can operate an efficient supply chain in the O-ring world, then it's got to be pretty cheap, because O-rings are, pennies or fractions of pennies a piece. So a couple ways we make it work is, number one, we're tracking package quantities as opposed to an individual piece. So our package quantity then absorbs the increased packaging cost. Our tag cost will increase your packaging costs on our standard 4x6 label. It's a 4x6 inch thermal printed label. The tag is actually embedded in the label, in a blank label, and sent to you in rolls of, it could be like minimum 1,000 or 500 in a roll. And that 4x6 label, open market, with no RFID tag in it, is going to cost you about 5 cents. If you put an RFID tag in it, that same label, that smart label, is going to cost you 15 cents or less.
Wow.
So at volumes, you can get them down under 10 cents.
Wow.
On a 4x6.
Not much at all. That's awesome.
No, so then you're just, you're increasing your packaging costs. If you put in the poly bag, you're already putting them in, or the box or the crate or whatever, you may, maybe you're going from like 45 cents to 60 cents, or 45 cents to 55 cents.
Yeah, but not
getting in return is just this massive automation piece. You don't need on the consumer side of things. You sometimes don't need purchasing agents, any of them.
Yeah, or it's even hard to find good purchasing agents, right? Because our industry is retiring the domain expertise. And I was just talking to someone from Boise yesterday, where they're having a really hard time just hiring people inside the industry, and then to become a purchasing agent, to know all about the supply chain and all this stuff. I mean, it takes years to get there.
Yeah.
It's a major need that just has to help them.
Right. So these little cheap sensors can really set you up to collaborate in a real strategic partnership with your supply base. And the way we have it structured now is Shelfware as a platform. If a large consumer gets excited, which typically is what happens, then they'll want to adopt the platform. They'll take their handful of favorite suppliers in each product vertical, introduce them to the Shelfware platform, and we'll start typically with one product vertical, automate that. But now I have consumers, manufacturers in the fluid power space that are utilizing Shelfware on 4 or 5 or 6 different supply chains.
That's so cool.
Yeah, going back to Eskridge, our original beta, they now use Shelfware platform on 4 different suppliers in 4 different product verticals. So they got a seal supplier, my family business, and then they have a packaging supplier like boxes, box tape, bubble wrap. All their finished goods packaging materials are all on Shelfware. And they have a fastener supplier that's doing nuts and bolts and lock washers and stuff, and bearings. That's on Shelfware. And then they also have hose fittings, adapters, all their fluid power connectors are all on Shelfware system too. So Shelfware is working with one consumer, automating multiple product verticals through independent suppliers. So we want the consumer to not have to go to that kind of, I don't know, and the best one to talk about is Fastenal, but go to that one big kind of Walmart of the industrial world. Because what you're going to get with them is, you'll get breadth of product, but you'll get very low expertise in each product category.
For sure.
And if you work with independent distributors, then you get a higher level of engineering, R&D, technical support, lower product costs, kind of the best of all worlds. So that's our goal, is to link niche, independent, suppliers up on a platform to take care of some of the industry's largest consumers in an efficient fashion.
Yes, it's okay. So I'm going to approach this a different way too. You probably heard a million times, but I'm thinking, okay, if I build pumps, motors, valves, I also want to get visibility into consumption of my components, because that's going to help me with forecasting and budget and stuff, right? So that's super interesting. 2, if I'm a distributor or a value-added integrator, being able to offer another digital service to my customers gives me a differentiator, as they're becoming more commoditized, right? So as they're becoming more commoditized on the boxes to the other people that are just pushing components, they have to have more and more value-added services. And I think it's hard to extend the current ERP systems that the fluid power world uses. I lived in that world. We interface with those worlds all the time. They're not super consumer friendly. They're definitely not, I would say, millennial friendly, right? Of what we expect out there. So that's super interesting too, because it could become a a differentiator, just not the cost perspective, but how that distributor ends up doing business
Right.
with their customers.
Yeah, that's where our family business was looking at it from a perspective of, in the O-ring world, it's so commoditized now, and the big guys were just getting bigger. From an
Yeah.
independent standpoint, from our viewpoint, like if we wanted to grow our family business, which, now we had 3 boys involved, my 3 brother-in-laws and then me. So next generation had 4 mouths to feed as opposed to like the original founder. So the and nobody talks about this much, but from an entrepreneurial perspective, if you want to split that business 4 ways and all 4 boys want to see some growth out of it, well, then you got to grow that business. And to grow in this world,
Yeah.
brutal right now. It's a very mature market, industrial landscape. And so we knew we had to approach it from a value added perspective, come up with some sort of strategic tool that would return massive ROI to the consumer, that would then make them want to turn over giant chunks of business, on their supply chain side. So that's the, I guess, the culmination of my family business story, or my exit from that story was in, latter part of 2017, we launched ShelfAware LLC as an independent business after our beta was wildly successful. And we'd had several aha moments from the Shelfware perspective. My 3 brother-in-laws said, okay, get out of here. You're going to be the front man on Shelfware. We're going to turn this into a supply chain platform, offer it to independent suppliers and other industries. And we had several different instances where large consumers had approached us in the seal space and given us large, huge contracts. And over like the course of 2 years, we had picked up millions of dollars in additional revenue, and which put us in a position and on track to triple my dad's family business from when we started.
So pull through is huge. The pull through
massive,
is huge.
yeah, massive. And it was because we had a strategic offering, so we weren't competing on price. We weren't, trying to nickel dime our competitors. It wasn't like relationship selling. It was just, hey, we have this sweet tool. You can use it, and we'll sell you seals at a competitive price.
It was pragmatic innovation, right? I mean, it's pragmatic innovation. So it's interesting about, okay, so our industry is fluid power, seals, everything. What gets me super excited about our industries is they are so old, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a ton of really cool innovations happening, right? Like every customer that we talk to has some really cool, project they're working on, or product, or whatever the case is. But I think that the companies don't have a playbook yet about how to create the innovation inside their organizations. That don't get lost in PowerPoints and budgets and everything, right? So I'm also a strong believer that the small independents are going to start the innovation. I don't think it's going to be a top-down approach from software from Silicon Valley that's going to disrupt the space. I think it's going to come from domain expertise. They're going to want to know that you have fluid power, oil through your veins, or whatever the case is, right, that you've lived there. So that's like super interesting that you guys have that same story. And I guess my question to you is, you had to foster the innovation growth, right? So it wasn't planned. I'm going to guess that you guys didn't have a book you bought and read it and all that stuff. So just kind of talk to me a little bit. I think this is super fascinating, because I think the big companies are either trying to do this themselves, or they're looking for partners that have done this before. Yeah. And this is where you speed up innovation, right? You partner with companies that came from the industry, and they have velocity and some scars. So talk to me about that. Yeah. So when we were in the thick of it, from 2012 to 2017, we didn't have, there wasn't a moment in 2012 where we all sat in the boardroom after reading, and mapped out this timeline to take over the supply chain world. We didn't really know anything about the supply chain world, apart from our little VMIs that we were running, in our inbound supply chain in Asia and some of our import and export stuff. But it was no master plan. Hold on, keep going. I'm going to close my door. You're not going to see me. Keep on going. Oh yeah, you're fine. There was no master plan for us. I think, and it took me years of plodding along, and I think it also takes a lot of reflection too to realize what happened. And now we have a good grasp on it. And what really happened was, and I referenced this earlier, was kind of an incremental process. Yeah. And if I was going to advise somebody today, and I do some speaking engagements and stuff on this topic, and so my recipe, have you ever heard, or obviously if you follow baseball, the Oakland A's, Yeah.
Manager Billy Bean.
Yeah.
There's a famous
Moneyball.
movie, Moneyball. Yep.
Yeah.
With Brad Pitt. I
Yeah.
use that a lot as kind of an analogy for what we're doing.
Side note, I hung out with those guys in Seattle. I'll tell you that story later.
Okay, that is awesome. I'd love to hear that.
I'll tell you that story later.
Yeah, the Billy Bean story, you know, it's when baseball started looking at sabermetrics and analytics as opposed to just like staring at college players and saying, oh, he's got a really strong jawline. I think he'll be able to hit it out of the park. You know, instead of doing that, they looked at like the actual numbers and said like, well, statistically, he's strong at getting to base because he gets walked a lot. Oh, okay. And he's kind of overlooked because he doesn't hit a lot of home runs. Well, okay, so that means he's cheap. All right, let's do it. So they're buying, like the Moneyball approach is, in business terms, is looking at those smaller investments where you can get a larger percentage return. So instead of trying to hit it out of the park with like $1 million digitalization project, hoping to like smash it out of the park, which very rarely happens on a massive, you know, system install, it's usually fraught with issues and errors and integration problems and bad data. And you're mired in like just swamp after swamp.
I always say like, here's the value gauge. Or I stole this from my buddy Rob, right? Here's a value gauge, and you really just need to move it a little bit to get massive value. And then that rest big move, you only get incremental value.
Right.
So you can find those small things. You can get big ROI.
Yes. Yeah. On a percentage basis, especially. And on the Moneyball approach, what you're trying to do is put several incremental innovations together to drive towards this larger goal of digitalization of either a business in general or a portion of the business, like your warehouse. Okay. So I think if you wanted to like boil it down to like just a real basic analogy, if you're a distributor and you wanted to get a wireless warehouse, you can go out and pay, you know, Epicor or a software company, you know, hundreds of thousands, let's say $500,000 for a wireless warehouse system, or over the course of 2 years, you could start a goal of, okay, we're going to create our own custom tailored wireless warehouse system using these features and components. We're going to use recycled mobile phones because they're dirty, cheap, and very powerful. Yeah. We're going to write a mobile app. We're going to produce internal, you know, documentation and process. I think honestly, that's more efficient, especially in the small business standpoint, and you're way, way, way better off. And it also leads you down this path to being capable of then launching an external innovation, perhaps years down the road. That's what happened with us. We really learned a lot, cut our teeth on a host of a series of internal innovations, got comfortable with making that leap to external. Because when you go from business to business, there's a ton of additional concerns. You know, data privacy, data security, data management.
Yeah,
I mean,
uptime, customer support, customer success.
Yeah, uptime, all the hardware. If you have hardware deployed, you have hardware maintenance and uptime. So making that leap's huge. And I think a couple of years of practice, when you have an innovation team and a small business and they're cutting their teeth on small, inside your four walls innovations, it turns you guys into just this mean, lean machine. And it also, what I learned, which is probably the hardest part about business, is the people. If you have a small business, 20, 30, 40 people, okay, and you're got a leader, like a business owner, who's just hell-bent on innovating it, and they come in and maybe they bring in an outside change agent and they're like, oh, we're going to implement all these new technology changes. You lose people like immediately with those programs. Yeah, your best employees.
I've seen this play out in our industry with companies.
Just death by change. Just nobody wants that much change. And if you come at it from this top-down approach, you lose everybody right out of the get-go. If you approach it from a small Moneyball kind of incremental approach, these small little wins. Okay, we went paperless in the front office and it went really smooth. Oh, okay. So then, you know, the rumor starts spreading around the company. Hey, the front office paperless system's pretty slick. Oh, okay, well then in the warehouse we're going to go paperless next. Oh, cool. Okay. So you can do like
success, right?
Yes, you get everybody on board with these small successes, and then you have a company that's got a change mindset. And they're like, hey, we've done it 20 times. It's worked out 19 of them or 18 of them. Let's do it again.
What's interesting about that too is, you know, very similar, I'd say to us, I would say that maybe the technology isn't the most interesting piece, right? Like anybody can do the technology in essence, right? It's really the culture and the wounds and the wins that's not so far. And when we're dealing with our partners and our customers out there, that they're really doing some type of digital transformation at the end of the day, the fact that we've came from the industry might be more important than the actual technology that's being used in it, right? So Yeah, it's super, super interesting.
And
Um,
people are a tricky component of it. And I think you have
yeah,
to consider the people. It's hard because you want to just consider the technology, but you got to consider the people that use this technology and their
technology just
emotions
blend
and
in, right? It should,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. Two more questions before we wrap up here. One is, I can imagine a scenario just talking with you now where this could really help out people that are in COVID or post-COVID situations, because if I do a vendor managed inventory system or whatever the case is, companies are a lot more cautious. I think they're going to be for the next number of years.
Mhm.
So not having to send somebody into my partner's facilities all the time,
Yeah.
get and have that conversation seems like it's a huge opportunity. Are you starting to see that out there in the space? People kind of having that light bulb moment going, hey, if I implement this technology and I spend 2 days getting this deployed,
Right.
I don't necessarily have to have my supplier come in every week now.
Right. So that's a great question. The simple answer is yes. The more complicated answer is we know we have the industry's only socially distanced VMI. And
Yeah.
we're quite confident of that. It's now up to us to get the word out about it. So we have a marketing campaign that we're getting ready to launch here in third quarter and then into the fourth quarter. And the timing's kind of tricky because we're working with independent distributors, usually smaller companies. On the consumer side, it can get pretty big. Like we're working on some really large names on the consumer side of things. But really, either way, in the COVID economy, I think it's a little early for people to get super excited about launching a new program. So we're trying to time the marketing piece right and the socially distanced VMI marketing piece.
Yeah.
We think that we're going to have a really good demand on fourth quarter, maybe first quarter 2021, because this is the way the industry is moving. We got to get people out of trucks, off the road, quit the time of mileage, quit the clipboards, the barcode scanners don't work, everybody hates them, and get to a more digital supply chain. So yeah, I'm really confident, super excited. It's COVID has not been fun because I think from a biz dev standpoint, frozen a lot of opportunities in place. Really, like we've just lost a ton of time because there's just too much uncertainty. So people just typically don't want to launch if they're worried the floor is going to drop out from under them on any new campaign. So, it's a bit of a balancing act right now, but long term, yeah, we're crazy excited. We think COVID's exposing some of the big weaknesses in our supply chains, and nobody wants to see your vendors walking into your facility, 2 or 3 times a week. It's
and every company has to become more cost efficient now, right? So every company's got to figure out how to turn that inventory. All right, so leave us with what you're excited about in the industry. Like you've been around it, you've been in the mud, the blood, and the beer, right?
Yeah.
You've been developing it. What excites you as you're out there meeting with customers, partners, stuff like that?
What excites me, and this is a little tongue in cheek, is the demographic change is exciting. So I'm seeing a lot of boomers retiring, which is exciting because I get to see a lot of millennials coming into their place.
For sure.
So I think the demographic change in our industry is going to expedite the whole technological innovation push.
Let me add something right there with you real quick. I think it's a tremendous time right now if I'm a millennial to come in, because you have these boomers that are going to be gone in the next 5 to 10 years, 3 years sometimes, right? And they have a tremendous amount of knowledge. And they are walking history books and encyclopedias of an industry that is very difficult. And if you can get into the right companies and the right teams, you will absorb a ton of information, because once they're gone, they're gone.
Yeah.
And a huge, massive amount of knowledge is leaving.
Yeah, we should do another podcast episode on apprenticeships in a technical marketplace, because we've done a couple of apprenticeships in my small family business with some of the boomers who, like you said, are just repositories, walking dictionaries of our industry. And we did a 3-year apprentice program to try and pull that knowledge out of their brains before they decided to hang it up and go to the beach or to the lake. And it was really, really, really successful. So apprenticeships, they need to be used more in a sales perspective, customer service perspective, and an ops perspective. If you're not having apprenticeships to make it through this transition, then you're going to lose that mindset. So the demographics, this turnover that's happening in our industry,
It's
It's
incredible.
fascinating. It's exciting. I think it's
Yeah.
going to lead to a whole bunch of new opportunities, possibilities, just a new mindset of acceptance towards this idea of a digital business, digital supply chain, remote
Yeah.
services. Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me. I enjoyed the conversation, as I always do whenever we see each other out there in the industry. So thanks so much, man. Looking forward to watching your journey continue.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me. Can't wait till COVID's over and I'll get on a plane and buy you a beer again. That'll be great.
Deal.
All right. See ya.